Picture this. A man stranded on the side of a lonely highway late at night. His car had given up, the engine refusing to start no matter how many times he turned the key. With no cell service and not a soul in sight, he was left to pace along the road, praying under his breath. Just as despair began to take hold, a pair of headlights appeared in the distance. A rusty pickup truck pulled over, and out stepped a grizzled stranger, someone he'd never expect to stop. Without a word, the man began working under the hood. Minutes later, the car roared back to life. When the stranded man turned to thank his helper, the truck and its driver were gone, as if they'd vanished into thin air. This story isn't just a tale of human kindness. It's a reminder that help often comes when we least expect it, and from the most unexpected places. It's in moments like these, when the odds seem stacked against us, that we witness the profound mystery of divine intervention. These aren't mere coincidences. They're signs of a higher power orchestrating the details of our lives in ways far beyond our comprehension. Here's the thing about divine help. It rarely fits into the neat little boxes we imagine. We often picture God answering our prayers with clear signs or direct solutions, but more often than not, His help arrives in ways that defy our expectations. And isn't that just like God? Isaiah 55:8-9 reminds us, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." Think about that for a moment. God's perspective isn't limited by time, space, or our human understanding. He sees the whole picture while we only catch glimpses. It's like standing too close to a masterpiece in a museum. All you see are the brushstrokes, the smudges, and the chaos. But step back, and suddenly the beauty and intention become clear. How often do we miss His hand at work because we're so focused on the way we think help should come? Maybe you've prayed for financial provision, expecting a sudden windfall, only to find someone offering you a job you hadn't even considered. Or perhaps you've asked for healing, but instead of instant recovery, God sends people into your life to walk with you through the journey, teaching you patience and strength along the way. These moments challenge us to let go of our assumptions and trust that His plan is always for our good. They're a call to remember that God's ways are not limited by our logic or understanding. And while that can feel frustrating at times, because let's be honest, we like things to make sense, it's also deeply reassuring. It means that even when life feels chaotic, there's a greater order at work. There's a story in the Bible that perfectly illustrates this: the feeding of the 5,000. Jesus took 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, barely enough for a single family, and turned it into a feast for thousands. Can you imagine being one of the disciples, watching Him bless that meager meal and then seeing it multiply in their hands? It must have blown their minds. That's the kind of God we serve, a God who takes our not enough and turns it into abundance, a God who works in ways that leave us in awe. And yet it's not just about the miraculous moments. Sometimes God's intervention is quieter, subtler. It's the unexpected phone call from a friend when you're feeling lonely. It's the stranger who pays for your coffee when you're having a rough day. It's the peace that washes over you in the middle of a storm, reminding you that you're not alone. These moments may not make headlines, but they're no less significant. They remind us that God is in the details, weaving a story of grace and provision even in the mundane. They challenge us to look beyond the surface and see His hand at work in every part of our lives. So the next time you find yourself in need, take a step back. Resist the urge to dictate how God should show up. Instead, open your heart to the unexpected. Trust that He sees what you can't, and His timing is always perfect. Remember, the God who parts seas, calms storms, and multiplies loaves and fishes is the same God who is working in your life right now. And His ways, They're far more beautiful, intricate, and extraordinary than we could ever imagine. Let's take a walk back through time, into the pages of Scripture, where the stories of God's unexpected help are written in bold, miraculous strokes. These aren't just stories from ancient days. They're timeless reminders of how God moves in ways that surprise, inspire, and transform. Take Elijah, for example, one of the most well-known prophets in the Bible. There's a moment in his story where things look bleak. A severe drought has ravaged the land, and Elijah finds himself without food or water. He's directed by God to a widow in Zarephath. Now, let's pause here. This widow isn't wealthy, influential, or well-connected. In fact, she's on the brink of starvation, preparing her last meal for herself and her son. She even tells Elijah, "I'm gathering a few sticks to take home and make a meal for myself and my son, that we may eat it and die." But here's where God's plan unfolds. Elijah asks her to bake him a small loaf first, promising that her jar of flour and jug of oil won't run dry until the rain returns. It sounds absurd, doesn't it? Yet she obeys, and just as God promised, the flour and oil sustain them all throughout the famine. What seemed like an impossible situation became a testimony of faith and provision, and it came through one of the most unlikely sources, a poor widow who had nothing to offer but her trust in God's word. Then there's the story of David, the shepherd boy destined to be king. Throughout his journey, David found help from the most unexpected places. Perhaps the most striking example is Jonathan, the son of King Saul. Saul saw David as a threat, an enemy to be eliminated. But Jonathan, he saw a friend. Despite knowing that David was chosen by God to take the throne, something that would cost Jonathan his own right to rule, he risked everything to protect David. Jonathan's loyalty defied logic, but it's a powerful example of how God can place allies in our lives when we need them most, even from the unlikeliest corners. And of course, we can't forget one of Jesus' most famous miracles, the feeding of the 5,000. Picture the scene: a massive crowd, hungry and restless. The disciples are overwhelmed, unsure how to provide for so many with such limited resources. But then, a young boy steps forward with his lunch, 5 small loaves and 2 fish. By any standard, it's laughable. How could something so small make a difference? But in the hands of Jesus, it becomes a feast that feeds thousands with baskets of leftovers to spare. This boy, nameless in the narrative, teaches us that no offering is too small when placed in the hands of God. Time and again, the Bible reminds us that God often works through people and situations we'd least expect. Think about the disciples Jesus chose: fishermen, tax collectors, zealots. These weren't scholars or religious elites. They were ordinary people, often looked down upon by society, and yet Jesus saw their potential and used them to change the world. Or consider Rahab, the prostitute in Jericho who helped Israelite spies. Society had written her off as insignificant, but God used her bravery to secure victory for his people. Her story even earned her a place in the lineage of Jesus, a powerful reminder that no one is too far gone or too unlikely to be used by God. This theme runs throughout Scripture. God works through those we might overlook, those deemed unworthy by the world's standards. And that's the beauty of his plan. It's not bound by social status, wealth, or appearance. It's driven by grace, by the ability to see what we cannot. What does this mean for us? It means we need to stay open to receiving help from unexpected places, to seeing God's hand in the ordinary, and to trusting that his provision may come in ways we never imagined. That stranger who offers you a kind word, the colleague who steps in during a crisis, or even the neighbor who lends a hand when you least expect it, these are all reminders that God is at work, often through the people and situations we least anticipate. It also challenges us to reconsider who we view as capable of helping. Too often, we're quick to judge, to assume someone can't possibly be an instrument of God because they don't fit our expectations. But the Bible shows us over and over that God doesn't see people the way we do. He looks at the heart, not the outward appearance, and He delights in using the humble, the overlooked, and the broken to accomplish His purposes. So whether you're in need of help or in a position to offer it, remember this: God's ways are higher than ours. His plans are more intricate than we can comprehend, and His provision often comes through the most surprising channels. The widow, the boy with the loaves and fish, the tax collector, the shepherd, they all remind us to stay open, to trust, and to believe in the extraordinary power of the unexpected. And this is just the beginning. There's so much more to uncover about how God works in our lives, often in ways that leave us speechless. Stay tuned, because the journey is far from over. Have you ever stood in front of a closed door, frustrated, confused, maybe even a little heartbroken? It's that moment when something you'd pinned your hopes on just doesn't work out. A job opportunity that falls through, a relationship that doesn't last, or a dream that seems to slip right out of your hands. In those moments, it's hard not to feel like the world is against you. But what if I told you that sometimes those closed doors are actually God's way of leading you to something better? Let's imagine you're on a hiking trail. The path you're following is clear, comfortable, familiar. Then, all of a sudden, you hit a dead end. A massive fallen tree blocks your way, and there's no climbing over it or going around it. You're forced to turn back and take a new trail, a path you hadn't planned to take. At first, it feels frustrating and inconvenient, but as you keep walking, you notice that this new trail is breathtaking. It leads you to a view you never would have seen otherwise, one that takes your breath away. Isn't life like that sometimes? We hit dead ends, closed doors, or unexpected detours, and all we can see in the moment is the frustration of what's not working. But what we don't see, at least not yet, is that God may be redirecting us to a path that leads to something far greater than we could have imagined. There's a verse in Proverbs 16:9 that says, "In their hearts humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps." It's such a simple reminder that while we're busy making our plans, God is working behind the scenes, guiding us toward what's truly best for us. Let me tell you a story to bring this to life. There was a young woman who dreamed of becoming a professional dancer. She trained for years, poured her heart into auditions, and gave it everything she had. But door after door closed. She didn't make the cut, and eventually she had to give up on that dream. It was devastating. But here's the twist. Those closed doors pushed her to explore teaching. She started a small dance class for kids in her community, just to make ends meet. Over time, it grew into a passion she never saw coming. Today, she runs a dance school that changes lives. She's inspired hundreds of kids, giving them opportunities she didn't have, and she couldn't imagine doing anything else. Her story is a perfect example of how God sometimes says no to what we think we want, only to redirect us to what we truly need. Those closed doors weren't failures. They were stepping stones to something better. In Scripture, we see this pattern again and again. Take Joseph, for example. He was sold into slavery by his own brothers. Talk about a closed door. He went from being his father's favorite to being thrown into a pit, falsely accused and imprisoned. But every closed door in Joseph's life was setting him up for something greater. In time, he became second in command over all of Egypt, saving countless lives during a famine, including the very brothers who betrayed him. What looked like rejection was actually God's protection and redirection, paving the way for Joseph's destiny. Sometimes God closes a door because he knows what's on the other side isn't good for us. Other times, it's because he has something so much greater in store. And while it's hard to see that in the moment, it's worth remembering that his vision is so much bigger than ours. He's not just looking at the here and now, he's looking at your whole story, from beginning to end. Think about it this way. When you're reading a book, you don't stop at the middle of a chapter and decide you hate the story because things aren't going the protagonist's way. You trust that the author knows where the plot is headed. And just like that, God is the author of our stories. What feels like an ending to us might just be the setup for the next chapter he's writing. I want you to imagine your life as a house with many doors and windows. Sometimes, we're so fixated on a closed door that we miss the open window right next to it. That window might not look like what you expected. It might be smaller or harder to climb through, but on the other side of it, there's light, fresh air, and a new perspective. So the next time you face a closed door, don't lose heart. Take a step back and look around. Trust that God is working behind the scenes, redirecting you to something better, brighter, and more aligned with His plan for your life. And while it might not make sense now, one day you'll look back and see that every closed door was part of His design. Life has a way of throwing us curveballs, doesn't it? Sometimes we feel like we're walking through a fog, uncertain of where the next step will take us, and that uncertainty can feel paralyzing. You know those moments when you're not quite sure what the future holds? Maybe it's a big decision, a life change, or just the everyday struggles that seem to pile up. It's easy to get caught up in the whirlwind of questions, doubts, and fear, wondering if we're doing the right thing, or if we'll ever find our way out. But what if I told you that sometimes the key to moving forward, even in those times of confusion, is simply trusting the process? It's not always about having everything figured out. It's not about knowing every twist and turn of the road ahead. Sometimes it's about trusting that there is a plan, even when we can't see it clearly. And that trust, it's a powerful thing. It can be the difference between being paralyzed by fear and stepping forward with courage. One of the most timeless pieces of wisdom we can lean on during those uncertain times comes from the Bible. Proverbs 3:5-6 tells us, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your paths straight." These words are more than just a comforting sentiment. They're a call to action, a reminder to let go of the need for control and embrace faith. What does it mean to trust with all your heart? It's not just a casual belief or a passing thought. It's an invitation to surrender. Surrender the need to have all the answers, to know exactly what the future holds. It's about trusting that there is a purpose behind the process, even when it doesn't make sense to us. We've all been there, at a crossroads, not sure which direction to take. And when we look at the situation from a purely logical standpoint, it might seem impossible. The steps ahead may look foggy, and the destination might seem unreachable. But in those moments, God is asking us to trust not just the process but His provision. Even when we can't see how it will work out, we're being invited to believe that there's a bigger picture unfolding, one that we may not fully understand yet. Think about it. Some of the greatest stories of triumph throughout history, whether in the lives of individuals or in the world around us, weren't built on having it all figured out from the start. They were built on the willingness to keep going, even when the path seemed unclear. It's the act of trusting the process that brings us closer to growth, healing, and success. It's natural to feel hesitant, to question your next steps when everything feels uncertain. But here's the thing, trust doesn't always come with immediate clarity. Sometimes it requires patience and perseverance. You might not have all the answers today, but that doesn't mean you're lost. It simply means that you're on a journey that's unfolding step by step. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where things didn't go as planned, and yet, in hindsight, you realize how perfectly everything fell into place? I know I've been there. There's a sense of peace that comes from looking back and seeing how the dots connect, how every setback and detour led to something greater than we could have imagined. But in the moment, it's hard to see it that way, isn't it? In those moments, we're asked to trust that even in our confusion, God is working behind the scenes, orchestrating a plan that will ultimately lead us to where we need to be. When we lean not on our own understanding, we're freeing ourselves from the need to have all the answers right now. We're trusting that we don't need to figure it all out in order to move forward, and in doing so, we allow ourselves to experience a deeper sense of peace, knowing that the burden of figuring everything out isn't ours to carry. God's provision is far greater than anything we could try to construct on our own. This doesn't mean that everything will always go smoothly. Life still has its challenges, its bumps along the way. But when we trust in God's plan, we begin to view those challenges not as obstacles, but as opportunities for growth. We begin to see that every challenge, every season of uncertainty is a part of the process that's ultimately leading us to something better. Now, don't get me wrong. It's okay to feel unsure. It's okay to have doubts. It's part of being human. But remember that doubt doesn't disqualify us from trusting. It's a natural part of the journey. What matters is whether we're willing to take the next step, even when we can't see the whole staircase. Trusting the process isn't about blind faith. It's about confidence in the one who holds the future in his hands. It's about knowing that, even when life doesn't make sense, there's a higher purpose at play. The beauty of faith is that it doesn't require us to see the whole picture. It simply asks us to trust in the brushstrokes as they unfold, one by one. So, if you're in a season of uncertainty, take heart. Trust that the process is unfolding as it should, even if you can't see the full picture right now. Trust that your steps are being guided, even when it feels like you're walking in the dark, and know that, in the end, it will all make sense. The path will straighten out, and you will arrive at exactly where you need to be, stronger, wiser, and more resilient than before. Keep going. Trust the process. It's all part of the journey. Gratitude is one of those powerful tools that often gets overlooked. We tend to think of it as simply a polite gesture or a nice feeling to have when things are going well, but gratitude is so much more than that. It's a gateway, one that opens our hearts and minds to recognize the blessings and guidance that are already present in our lives, especially those moments where God has been there, working behind the scenes, even when we didn't immediately see it. I think we've all had those moments, times when something unexpected happens, and in the moment, we may not fully grasp how significant it is. But when we pause, reflect, and look back, we see a pattern, a divine thread that ties everything together. It's almost as if things just worked out in a way we couldn't have orchestrated ourselves. We look back and think, wow, that was God. But here's the thing. In order to recognize those moments, we need to cultivate an attitude of gratitude. Without gratitude, we can easily miss the subtle, quiet ways in which God is moving in our lives. Without pausing to acknowledge it, we may take the blessings and guidance for granted, not fully appreciating how much we've been given. Gratitude opens our eyes to see God's hand in the little things, the unexpected blessings, the doors that open, the guidance that comes when we least expect it. Have you ever found yourself in a difficult situation, unsure of what to do next, and then, out of nowhere, a solution seems to appear? Maybe it's an encouraging word from a friend, a random piece of advice that resonates deeply, or even a sudden opportunity that seems to land right in front of you. In those moments, we can sometimes dismiss it as coincidence or luck, But when we look through the lens of gratitude, we can see it for what it truly is: God's provision, His guidance, His help, showing up in ways that we may not have been aware of at the time. Gratitude is powerful because it shifts our perspective. It allows us to stop focusing on what's missing or what's going wrong, and instead, it helps us focus on what's going right, the blessings we already have, even in the midst of challenges. When we choose to be grateful, we open ourselves up to recognizing the goodness around us, including the ways that God is working on our behalf. Gratitude doesn't just change how we feel, it changes how we see the world. Think about the times in your life when you've received unexpected help or guidance. It could be something as simple as a chance meeting with someone who offered the exact advice you needed, or a breakthrough in a situation that seemed impossible. In those moments, if you stop to reflect, you might realize that God was there all along, providing the guidance you needed, even if it didn't come in the way you expected. The key is to pause and reflect. We often rush through life, moving from one task to the next, without taking the time to acknowledge the many ways in which we've been blessed. But when we slow down, when we take a moment to express gratitude, we begin to see the hand of God more clearly. It's in those moments of reflection that we can look back and recognize His presence, even in times when we felt uncertain or alone. Gratitude also deepens our connection with God. When we acknowledge His help, even in the smallest ways, we strengthen our relationship with Him. We recognize that we're not walking this journey alone. There's a divine presence that's been guiding, protecting, and providing for us every step of the way. And when we express our gratitude for that, we draw closer to Him, reinforcing the trust and faith that we need to continue on our path. It's easy to get caught up in the hustle of life, isn't it? To focus on the struggles and the challenges. But imagine how much richer our experience would be if we spent more time reflecting on the moments where we've seen God's hand at work in our lives. Imagine how much clearer His guidance would become if we took the time to acknowledge the blessings, both big and small, that come our way. The beauty of gratitude is that it doesn't require us to have everything figured out. You don't need to know exactly how the next chapter will unfold to be thankful for what's already happened. Gratitude allows us to rest in the knowledge that, no matter how uncertain life feels at times, God is already working things out for our good. And when we practice gratitude, we begin to notice His help more clearly, not just in the big moments, but in the everyday occurrences too. Take a moment today, or even this week, to pause and reflect on the ways God has shown up for you. Maybe it's through unexpected blessings, opportunities, or guidance. Maybe it's through a feeling of peace in a storm, or a door that opened at just the right time. The more we express gratitude for these moments, the more we will see and recognize God's work in our lives. When we embrace gratitude, we allow ourselves to see that we are never truly alone. God is always present, guiding, helping, and loving us through every moment. So let's make it a practice, one day at a time, to recognize and give thanks for the many ways He's been there for us. And in doing so, we'll not only see His hand more clearly, but we'll also experience a deeper sense of peace and connection with Him along the way. Staying open to divine help isn't always something that comes naturally. Life can be overwhelming, and when we face challenges, it's easy to feel like we need to figure everything out on our own. But what if the very help we need is right there, waiting for us to recognize it? To truly stay open to God's guidance and assistance, there are a few practical steps we can take, steps that not only help us receive His help, but also create an environment where we're more attuned to His presence in our lives. The first step is something that can feel so simple, yet it's often overlooked: praying for discernment. When we're seeking help or guidance, it's easy to fall into the trap of simply wanting a clear answer or solution. But prayer isn't just about asking for what we want. It's also about seeking clarity and understanding so that we can recognize divine help when it shows up. By praying for discernment, we're essentially asking God to open our eyes and hearts to the ways He's already working in our lives. We're asking Him to help us see things more clearly, to understand His will more deeply, and to give us the wisdom to make decisions that align with His plan for us. It's easy to get caught up in the noise of the world, where everyone seems to have their own idea of what we should be doing or how we should be living. But when we ask for discernment, we're tuning into God's voice over all the other distractions. We're asking for the wisdom to recognize the moments where He's guiding us, where His hand is at work in ways we might not have noticed before. Another powerful step to staying open to divine help is maintaining a posture of humility and open-mindedness. The truth is, divine help often doesn't come in the way we expect. It doesn't always show up in a grand, dramatic way. Sometimes it's through a small whisper, a gentle nudge, or an unexpected encounter. If we're not careful, we can miss it because we've already decided how we think things should go. Or we've become so set in our own ways that we're no longer open to seeing things from a different perspective. Humility helps us to remain open to new possibilities, to be willing to accept help when it comes, even if it challenges our pride or preconceived ideas. Think about it. Sometimes we resist help because we think we should be able to handle things on our own. We may feel that asking for help is a sign of weakness, or that we should have figured it out by now. But the truth is, being humble enough to accept help doesn't make us weak, it makes us wise. It shows that we're willing to trust in a higher power and a greater plan than our own. This doesn't mean we're passive or that we should wait around for everything to be handed to us. Instead, it means we stay open to receiving help in whatever form it comes, and we don't let pride block us from recognizing it. Whether it's through a friend who offers support, a stranger who shares a word of encouragement, or an unexpected opportunity that opens up, God's help often arrives in ways that challenge our assumptions about how things should work. And when we stay humble and open-minded, we make space for that help to flow into our lives. Then, there's the step of simply being willing to accept help, even when it's uncomfortable. Let's be real. Sometimes the help we receive challenges us. It might come from a source we didn't expect, or it might require us to let go of old ways of thinking or doing things. It might even challenge our pride, forcing us to admit that we don't have all the answers, that we can't do everything on our own. But this is where growth happens. This is where transformation takes place. Being willing to accept help means surrendering control, allowing ourselves to be vulnerable, and stepping into a space of trust. It's about recognizing that divine help doesn't always look the way we thought it would, but it's still exactly what we need. It may require us to lean on others, step out of our comfort zone, or let go of our own plans. But when we embrace that help, when we let go of the need to have it all figured out, we open ourselves up to receiving exactly what we need at the right time. Staying open to divine help also means practicing patience. Sometimes the help we need doesn't come immediately. Sometimes we have to wait, and that waiting period can feel incredibly uncomfortable. But in those moments, it's important to remember that God's timing is always perfect. His help isn't delayed. It's right on time, even if it doesn't arrive according to our schedule. Patience helps us to stay open, to trust that the help we need is coming, even if we can't see it yet. Finally, to stay open to divine help, we need to be proactive about seeking it. It's one thing to wait for help to come to us, but it's another to actively seek it out. That could mean talking to a mentor or trusted friend, opening our hearts in prayer, or simply reflecting on the ways God has been present in our lives before. When we actively seek help, we show that we're open and ready to receive it. We create space for God to move, to guide, and to provide in ways we may not have expected. It's easy to think that staying open to divine help means simply waiting for something to happen, but in reality, it's about actively looking for the ways in which God is already at work. It's about praying for discernment, staying humble and open-minded, accepting help even when it challenges us, and having patience as we trust in His timing. When we take these steps, we not only stay open to divine help, but we also open the door to experiencing more of God's love, provision, and guidance in our lives. As you head into this week, I challenge you to look for the ways God is already at work in your life. Trust Him more fully, even in the moments where you feel uncertain. Sometimes, His provision comes in the most unexpected places, in the people you meet, in the opportunities that seem to pop up out of nowhere, or even in the quiet moments of peace when you least expect it. He's always present, always providing, even when we don't see it right away. So, take a step back and allow yourself to trust in God's plan, especially when it doesn't make sense. Seek His guidance, open your heart to the possibilities, and stay alert to the ways He may be showing up in unexpected ways this week. Whether it's a small miracle, a word of encouragement, or a door that opens at the perfect time, look for His hand in every moment. You'll be amazed at how much more you'll begin to recognize His presence when you actively seek it. And I'd love to hear from you. Share your stories of divine intervention, of the unexpected ways God has shown up in your life. Your story could be the inspiration someone else needs to see God's provision in their own life. Drop your experiences in the comments below, and let's encourage each other in faith. Together, we can remind each other that no matter where we are, we're never alone, and that God's help is always just a prayer away. Stay blessed, stay open, and let's see how God moves this week.